You know, we hear ad nauseum about the effects of independent media or people like Joe Rogan or, social media, and how it misleads people and it spreads misinformation and it changes public opinion in a negative way, and it affects society. We hear that all the time. But what we don't hear is how mainstream media or how government and their own policies actually mislead people and push people in a direction to support things that are not based on reality, that are not based on science. And we're going to look at a couple pieces of evidence here that make it pretty damn clear how basic facts about COVID are not understood by massive swaths of people and the impact that is having on society. And most of this comes directly from misleading information from mainstream media, government, and policies that go on. So let's break this down a little bit. First thing I want to look at here is one of my favorite polls. I've been kind of tracking a lot of what Gallup has been doing on certain issues for quite a while. One of my favorites here is the American people were asked, what is the risk of hospitalization for unvaccinated people? So I'll say right off the top, the rate of unvaccinated people ending up in hospital is less than 1%. So with COVID in general, the rate at which people end up in hospital has always been low, right? Just like the death rate, the infection fatality rate has always been low. However, the way media has presented things, the way government policy has presented things, the way the propaganda basically coming out of these institutions has presented things, is that basically everybody's going to end up in hospital, everybody's going to die, and unvaccinated people are at just an insane amount of risk. So you look back to this graph and you look at it and you say, 1% is less than 1% is the correct answer. Only 2% of Democrats got this right. 16% of Republicans got it right. 11% of independents got it right. You flip all the way to the opposite side of this graph and you see that Democrats, 41% of them, believed that the rate of unvaccinated people ending up in hospital is 50% or higher. Even Republicans at 22% believed that, and even independents at 26% believed that. This represents something that I think is fascinating, because if we're specifically going to pick on, and I'm not Democrat, I'm not Republican, I don't really engage with the political process, but if we're going to specifically look at Democrats here right now, we're going to say only 2% of them got the answer correct, and the vast majority of them were off by margins that are just completely out of touch with reality. You have to ask the question, how did they arrive at these ideas? Where did 41% of Democrats get the idea that the rate of people who are unvaccinated and end up in hospital is 50% or higher? How did that happen? And you have to only look at where they're getting their information from and what the sentiment of their political heroes that they've been following. What have they been saying? What have they been talking about? We've heard Biden say many, many times, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Well, if people put their trust in political people, positions of president or senators or congresspeople, and they believe what they say, then, well, yeah, it's not surprising that if a president is out there constantly saying this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, then people are going to assume, well, unvaccinated people are basically just, ending up in hospitals. If they get COVID, they're basically dead, is the sentiment that is here. When in reality, it is nowhere close to what the actual truth is. So when you then look at, okay, so you now have all of these people who are completely misled, completely misinformed about basic facts around COVID. Now you take another poll. This one is from Heartland Institute and Rasmussen Reports. They did a national telephone and online survey. And this is fascinating as well, because you start to realize that, in particular, Democrats were in support of really harsh, if not, very obviously authoritarian ideas against the unvaccinated. So let me read off a few things that they were very much in support of. 58% of voters would oppose a proposal for federal or state governments to fine Americans who choose not to get a COVID vaccine. However, 55% of Democratic voters would support such a proposal, compared to just 19% of Republicans and 25% of unaffiliated voters. So this is basically saying, as a result of the position that Democrats hold, 55% of them want to see unvaccinated people be fined. 59% of Democratic voters would favor a government policy requiring that citizens remain confined to their homes at all times, except for emergencies, if they refuse to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Such a proposal is proposed by 61% of all likely voters, including 79% of Republicans and 71% of unaffiliated voters. So almost 60% of Democratic voters want to see unvaccinated citizens confined to their homes, unless it is for an emergency. Now, nearly half, 48% of Democratic voters think federal and state governments should be able to fine or imprison individuals who publicly question the efficacy of existing COVID-19 vaccines on social media, television, radio, or in online or digital publications. Only 27% of all voters, including 14% of Republicans and 18% of unaffiliated voters, favor criminal punishment of vaccine critics. So now you have 50% of Democrats who want to criminally punish people who criticize these vaccines. I got to go right back to it, and I got to show you once again this Gallup poll. 41%. So we heard the numbers. It was between 48% to almost as high as 60% of Democrats. And then you look here, 41% of them believe that unvaccinated people are ending up in hospital at a rate of 50% or higher. They're completely out of touch with reality. Ideas born from lies and misleading information coming from government and health agencies, lies and misleading information coming from mainstream media, producing a sentiment that is pushing them in a position where large swaths of Democrats at the moment are completely out of touch with the basic facts around COVID, and they then support really crazy ideas that are presented to them. This is the literal definition of using fear and propaganda to control people's perception, put them completely out of touch with reality, so they will support ideas that are very damaging and authoritarian. So ideas that nobody would normally support if they had all the facts. Because they don't have all the facts and they have a completely skewed reality, are now willing to support. Again, literal definition of propaganda. We're seeing it happen live. For me, this is one of the most striking realizations that has come from this whole COVID situation, is being able to see the effects of, after 2 years and the stuff, everybody's been talking about it. We made a video, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, talking about how the consistent demonization of unvaccinated people is not only unscientific, but it is going to create a situation where large swaths of the population are going to have this very incongruent and aggressive perspective of unvaccinated people that could become potentially dangerous for unvaccinated people. And one of the things I want to point to in how people have so easily, so if we're just talking about the science here, how people have become so easily misled by this concept of unvaccinated, is you consistently see that, and I'm going to pull up a headline here. And this headline is basically, this is from Reuters, and it's saying, this is an example of many, many headlines. Omicron less severe than Delta, but still poses danger for the unvaccinated, right? This is coming from the World Health Organization. And if you go through the article, it just basically talks about how, Omicron for the unvaccinated, still really dangerous. The reality of the situation is, when you say the unvaccinated, it means nothing. Because as we've seen with COVID, you have people who are immunocompromised with 4 or more comorbidities, who are elderly, who are at thousands of times higher risk of death and severe disease than children who are unvaccinated, than young people who are unvaccinated. So to just say the unvaccinated, no matter the age group, no matter their health, no matter their comorbidities, are all the same, is completely unscientific and disingenuous. The reality of the situation is, it entirely depends. The people who are unvaccinated, who are ending up in hospital with severe disease, for the vast majority of them, are people with comorbidities, are people who are older, are people who are vulnerable to this particular disease. You can't treat all unvaccinated people the same, because the data just doesn't support that. However, headlines and the general sentiment that is consistently coming is that, the hospitals are packed with unvaccinated people. The truth is, the hospitals are packed with unvaccinated people who happen to be immunocompromised and have 4 or more comorbidities. It is not packed with generally healthy unvaccinated people. That is just a sentiment that's not true. And blanketing the statement by saying, well, all unvaccinated people are at risk, is a literal, patently false, piece of information that is not being fact-checked. that is not being held to account, and that is creating a public perception amongst American people that is pushing them to support ideas that are extremely authoritarian and that are extremely bad because they're completely misinformed about the reality of what's going on. So this is the effect of misleading and false information coming from politicians, coming from mainstream media, coming from health agencies, who have themselves, by what they've said, eroded trust, because people who are saying, well, hold on, let's take a second and actually look at the information, are realizing these people are not really telling the entire truth. In fact, they're almost purposefully trying to mislead us. And so they don't have trust. So is it really the independent media? Is it really the Joe Rogans of the world who are creating this massive loss of trust in institutions? Or is it the institution themselves, right? I would argue that's what it is. Now, of course, how do we solve the situation? What are we leading towards? Yes, we have this realization that awareness alone is going to help us go, maybe we can see a pattern of something that's happening here, and the solutions kind of become obvious. Get your information from more than just legacy media, more than just mainstream media. Obviously, you're going to have an incomplete and completely misled perception of what's going on with COVID and many other things in the world if you're only getting your information from from mainstream media. You know, get a good, healthy diet of media from a lot of different places, a lot of different perceptions, and sit there going, I agree with you, I don't agree with you, I agree with you, I don't agree with you. Sit with it and be like, how are they coming to these conclusions? How are they coming to these perspectives? Asking the questions, exploring the stuff, and really sitting in a position where we're pulling ourselves out of our political ideologies and political identities and only watching media that supports our political stuff, pulling ourselves out of that and saying, what is really going on here? How can we truly determine what the truth is? And being able to sit in that position of uncertainty, of wanting truth, not wanting to just be told what's happening and not questioning it, but just really wanting truth. And for those looking to dive a little bit deeper into this idea, we have a ton of stuff in our membership. We have a course, 8-week course on overcoming bias and improving critical thinking. We also have a pretty powerful webinar called The Physiology of Sense Making, which helps us understand how to embody a state of being to increase our ability to make sense of what's going on in our world, which includes communicating with people. If you want to check that out, there'll be a link in the comments about joining our membership. But that's it. That's all for this video. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really enjoy hearing from you guys about what did I miss? Am I looking at something incorrectly here, or do you have something to add to the situation? Any comments, any ways to take this deeper? This is how we learn and grow as media creators as well. So be sure to leave something in the comments. If you're first time watching our channel, be sure to subscribe, and thanks so much for being here.